Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm Den Haring. My channel is Fish Den 365. I've been looking forward to doing this video. This is a video about what's going on here revisited. So a week ago or so we did a video about something that I've noticed about. It seems that some lures, especially hard plastic lures like crankbaits and topwaters, outproduce others, even though they might be the same manufacturer, same color, same type. Some seem to be better than others, and why is that? And I asked everybody to comment on it because this was always a fascination of mine. So I think I'm going to start with reading some of the comments because I got some very thought-provoking and thoughtful comments. So let me read a few, or maybe I'll just go through all of them here if I can. So the first one here is Jack Gilroy. He says, my theory, the snowflake effect. No two lures are created equal. The slightest manufacturing difference can make one lure run lower, higher, or produce less or more wobble, vibration, etc. Plus, throw in the confidence you have in that lure. Even though identical, you can subconsciously work that lure in a slightly different way than the other. Those are legitimate points for sure. We had another person, Apugali, great subject. I lost a rattle trap, that still haunts me. I'd say different situations, it can be the bait, it could be confidence, or both. I found that trolling cranks with the same line, bait, and amount of line out can really show the ones that have it, meaning the crankbaits that have the fish catching attributes. Bill Carrion says, I agree. They're always changing the process to build better and build cheaper, meaning the manufacturers of these lures are making small and minute changes, and so that has an effect on making the lures different. Houndhog says, I'd say some small imperfections make them have slightly different actions. Even something like a small nick on the bait could cause such a thing. Think about a pitcher in a baseball and how small scuff or tacky substance affects a pitch. I'd assume the same thing can happen to lures. That's a good point. Mr. John B says, my thoughts as I watched a few videos is that all lures out of the box are the same. Some might be true and run perfect, while others may be out of tune a little and don't give the action needed to represent the bait it was intended to mimic. They say the ones that don't run well put on the shelf. Like you had a couple baits the same color-wise and model, one outfished the other. Looking forward to hear your thoughts and stay safe. God bless. Thanks, Mr. John. Confidence is definitely something, and there are differences in how these baits are tuned. That comes into play too. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So Wayne Sammy Swingle, my initial thought is angler confidence and of course angler superstition. I know there are certain lures that I'll always reach for first, even if I have an identical one in the box. With crankbaits specifically, it may be the way they are tuned. Maybe one goes a little left or right and may suit your style of fishing. But for me, I truly believe it is angler superstition. And it may be, but I do believe there, and I'm sure that happens, but I think there's a little more to it than that, and we'll get into it in a little bit. Adam Bahara, Fishing, says, you picked a maddeningly frustrating subject. Number one, material type and construction of the bait comes into play. Although they are the same brand and maybe even the same color, they may have used a different batch of plastic or changed the metal element of the counterweight, copper to steel, brass to lead. Thin wall baits catch more, but their durability is compromised. Bill Lewis did some experimentations in the realm and began using internal honeycomb structures for their baits. This allows the plastic walls to be thinner than before. With diving baits, the thickness of a lip material can be a factor. Some lures also change their line tie options. Something as simple as a round or oval split ring can make a difference. As someone who carves my own baits, this subject is fascinating. Always going for better on that next build. Some good points there. Frank Powell, I can't explain why, but it happens. There are just some particular lures that have all the magic ingredients. I agree with that. Jim No says, I'll go with the confidence quality control. Cheaply manufactured lures would tend to have more variations that could change sound or action that the fish could cue in on. Then there's the confidence thing, where when you catch a fish on one lure and not another, you will tend to fish the one you caught a fish on first more often, and even though there may or may not be any fish attracting advantage at all. Two people fishing side by side isn't even a fair comparison, in my honest opinion, since I have already witnessed one far out fishing the other, even while trying to mimic and even swapping rod, reels, and baits. And I agree with that, Jim. For sure, when when you add another person to the equation, you're just adding another variable for how things can be different. William Phillips says, boy, has this happened to me. In April, I noticed a large number of hits on my finder in 8 feet, moving up to 4 feet. I threw everything with no hits. Finally, I tried a large rattle trap. I caught 5 largemouth. Everyone was over 5 pounds. I got each of them on the first cast, all working the same location. Best I could figure was the rattle trap matched the same size and color of the local sunny population that share the same spawning beds in this lake. All the largemouth hits were violent. All it was is moving the sunnies out of the bass beds. It was one of the best moments of fishing I've had. One bass was 6 pounds. To sum it up, just think like a fish. Yeah, good points. Lake Ratatouille. Good question. I'm in North Texas and the red craw color or white shad rules the pre-spawn. The redder the better. And small works best. D. Durkin 11 says it's all about the subtleties. Dennis Silver says, I think it has to do with lure's finish. What fish wouldn't bite a bright shiny lure? But let a lure get exposure to sunlight and it will fade and change its color. It will be more natural to a fish and therefore attract more bites. My thoughts. That definitely happens on soft plastic lures like tubes and Ned rigs. The more beat up they get, the more fish they seem to catch. Here's someone, Let Run 3481 says, how much do you want for these lures? Laughing out loud. They're not for sale. And then Dave Angstrom says 10 or 20 to 1 is a mighty big claim, in that I was saying that this lure catches 10 to 20 to 1 of one of these other lures. He says it's a mighty big claim. Is that a guess, or did you actually keep records? Well, for many years, since the early 70s, I have kept records, and I put them in databases and Excel spreadsheets. And in my response to you, Dave, I put a link to a video of just exactly how I kept those records, and so you may be interested in that video. I stopped doing it somewhere about 4 years ago when I started this channel, because I figured I have a video record of most of my fishing excursions now. But I have, 30 years or more, actually closer to 40 years of pretty interesting record keeping that has told me some things that I wouldn't have known otherwise. So this whole subject got an early start for me. I was probably around 9 years old when Beltsville was opened up, Beltsville Lake in Carbon County. And I remember my dad and my brother going there for the opening day of trout. And back then, we just fished from shore. And my dad had this spoon-like lure. I wish I had it here. He probably has it. We probably have it yet at his house. If I get it, I'll find it. He had 3 of them. They looked identical. It was a spoon, and glued onto the spoon was like a ceramic-looking white, I don't even know what it was, like a white plastic piece that had some orange and red in it. And he threw this spoon, and my brother was with them. This was a day that I was not there, but my dad ended up catching some nice rainbow trout and some brown trout, all on that one spoon. He had 3 of them. My brother was throwing one. He couldn't catch anything on his, so they swapped the spoon, and the fish continued to be caught on the spoon that my dad first started with, and couldn't catch it on the other spoon. And so this had gone on. This was going on for weeks now, where the next week, same kind of thing happened. The following week, my dad was coming home and telling me, I've got this really special lure here. It's different than the other ones. He was convinced of this. And whether or not it was true or not, I don't know. But I do remember him thinking that, and my brother experiencing and witnessing this as well. So from an early age, I thought that's interesting. That what is it about one lure that makes fish more attracted to it than maybe an identical lure of the same kind? And over the years, I've read a lot of articles in the fishing magazines. I'm a big reader of all the magazines, and I've got tons and tons of books. And in a few minutes, I'll read a little bit from this one. And a lot of the guys who fish professionally, and these are the guys who are most likely to become aware of this, because they're just fishing a whole lot more than we are, at least more than I am. And some of these guys are really good with crankbaits, for example, and they've noticed these things too. And so I will introduce this book here. This is one of Kevin Van Dam's books. This is called Bass Strategies. And in chapter 11, it's called Do You Really Know Your Lures? And he has a section in here. I'll read a little bit of this to you. It says, those magical lures. He says, I know that I stated in the previous chapter that there are no magical lures, but that doesn't mean there aren't some special lures that for whatever reason catch more fish than others just like them. These rare treasures are most commonly found in crankbaits and topwaters. Interesting. Same as what I've found. And have something to do with slight variance in the manufacturing process. I'm sure a lot of it is a matter of confidence in a specific lure, something a lot of the guys brought out and I would agree with. But there's more to it than that. For example, I've got dozens of Fire Tiger 7A bombers that catch fish, but I have a handful of special gems that seem to catch fish better. I think they have a special action or produce a unique sound that the fish like better. Those go in my tournament box and are only used when I really need to catch a fish. He goes on to say the differences in plastic baits usually occur in those lures with rattles. That's probably because of a slight positioning difference of the rattle when the bait was molded together. However, you'll find more drastic differences in wood baits, something that a few of you have noticed, because of the different densities of wood used. Even though a company may make all of their lures out of cedar, no two pieces of cedar are alike. If you were to compare the precise diving depths and actions of 6 identical wooden baits, you'd be surprised by how they can differ. That's why I always like to test my wood baits in the swimming pool where I can see how they perform. Some will float slowly to the top while others may suspend or float rapidly. Once I determine those characteristics, I'll initial that action with a marker just beneath the bill. For example, if the lure suspends, I'll place an S on the belly. If it's a slow floater, I'll mark it with an SF. That eliminates a lot of guesswork, and I know which lure to choose for the proper presentation. So interesting words there from KVD, and you know, I've read a lot of articles about what he would do, and one of the things that Kevin Van Dam does, from what I read, and others as well, is they may buy 100 crankbaits at one time, 100 of them, all at one shot, and then go to a swimming pool and test every one of them. And generally speaking, depending on, you know, the quality of the bait and the brand and all that, generally speaking, they usually say the same thing, that 10 out of those 100 will be special. Now, I don't know how they know what to look for. I do think I do know some of what they're looking for. They're looking for something called a hunting action. And what they mean by hunting is a crankbait, when you throw it out and reel it back, you know, it'll come back to you and it wobbles. But when you have a hunting action, sometimes it'll go off to the side, but it always tracks back to the center. And then it might go off to the other side, but it'll track back to the center. It's those ones that track back to the center, because others might go to the side and stay there, this side or this side, and they'll just, you know, and they'll go off, and then you tune them and you try and get them straight. But there's some number of lures that when you tune them, they'll go off to the side but come back to center, they'll go off to the side and come back to center. And it's that action that a lot of these guys are looking for, because that seems to be a big trigger for catching bass. And I would guess that that trigger is somewhat visual, that they can see that and they think that something's wrong with that bait, it's injured or sick, and there's some type of instinct in the bass that makes them react to that and want to eat it. Those things make sense to me. And so, you know, if you know what to look for, you can pick that out, and so, you know, so many crankbaits, and then get the best of the baits, which is another thing that I've always wondered about. I like to go to tackle swaps and fishing flea markets every spring, like a lot of you do, and I've spent many an hour selling baits, but I've also gone to buy baits. And sometimes I'll go and I'll see a fisherman, and he'll have all these crankbaits laid out on the table. And a lot of times these guys are pretty good fishermen. I know some of them. And I often can't help but wonder, are those their rejects? have they gone through their baits, and what you're seeing on the table there is rejected crankbait? I don't know. I've bought them, you know, and I test them myself sometimes, but it is something that goes through my mind sometimes. It's just an interesting thing to think about when you see that kind of thing and you're at one of the flea markets. So now we've got into this discussion, and there's all these variables, right? We talked about tuning the bait, but it does seem that there are, even with that some baits just seem to outproduce others, and I think it happens pretty consistently, especially with topwaters and crankbait and lipless cranks. And I remember reading in Fisherman magazine, this was recently, where they were doing these underwater studies, and they found that when a fish swims through the water, There's vortices and all this that as it goes through the water, and it creates what they would call a signature, like that other fish, like game fish, can pick up to 5 minutes later after a let's say a sunfish swims by, and if a game fish comes into that sunfish's path, up to 5 minutes after that sunfish has passed through, they're saying that the science is telling them that the game fish can detect that, track them down if they want to, but not only that, probably be aware of what it was that went through there, whether it was another fish or what the shape of the fish was, which was just amazing to me. I couldn't find the magazine. I have it somewhere, but I did get on infisherman.com, and I'll read this to you. Recent research has pointed out that fish species detect and can follow the trail of fish that have just passed, perhaps identifying its species and size, and whether it's weak or wounded, which would make it a prime target. As fish swim, they create hydrodynamic vortices that could be seen by adding dye to a fish tank. This detection comes via the lateral line and provides an advantage for anglers. Lures create their own trails through the water. Some more lifelike than others. At InFisherman, we've often hypothesized that the reason predators respond so strongly to swim baits is because of the low-frequency trails left in their wake. We often see bass, walleye, and pike with the entire swim bait within their mouths. They didn't feel the need to nip or bump to the bait to believe it was the real deal, but unhesitatingly inhaled it. So the science now underwater is telling us that if a fish, something like a minnow or sunfish or whatever, swims by and that leaves these vortices that's kind of like a signature of what that is, well then I imagine so does this and everything else we're throwing out there. And there's two senses that bass have. One is hearing, and their hearing is very good. People didn't realize how good their hearing was because they don't have ears, but they do. They have otoliths. You just don't see it. But they're on the fish, and they're suited to hear very well underwater, but only certain frequencies, very low frequencies, which is why they have, or I should say, a small subset of the frequencies that we can hear through. But they also have a lateral line, which also picks up vibrations. And that's what sound is. Sound is a vibration. For you guys who remember your physics, it's a longitudinal wave. And so now it kind of makes sense. You can have these different signatures, and maybe, just maybe, some of our baits have a more attractive signature or a more attractive sound vibration in the water. Maybe that sounds something more akin to something that's injured or something that the fish is familiar with and has fed on in the past. And then it starts to come to light that, well, maybe it isn't just confidence. Maybe some baits are better than others. And I can tell you from a topwater perspective, I mean, this thing is a killer. I don't ever want to lose this bait. And I don't even, when I look at this bait, I don't like the color of it so much. It's not a bad color, especially the light belly, but I like this color better. It looks like an alewife, and I like this color better as well. But I can tell you, and so because I like those colors better, I spent a lot of time fishing those two baits. But they don't catch fish like this one. And so, and you might say, well, maybe it's that color. And I don't think so. Because I've had another bait just like this one that was another killer. And I lost it to probably the biggest smallmouth I ever had on. It was a giant smallmouth, and it broke my line at the boat because I was unprepared. But and it was the same color as that bait. And that bait doesn't catch them like that other one did. You fish long enough, you start to pick up on these kind of things. And I know confidence makes a huge difference. I'm a big believer and proponent of that. If you're confident in something, you're going to catch more fish on it because you are. And it just makes a difference. But I do think that there's another factor at play, another variable, and it has to do with some of the things that we've talked about today. The fish's sense, the sound and vibration, and the signature that some of these things may leave in the water. And so what's the point of the video? Well, the point is, if you have a bait that you've caught fish on, you want to make sure you protect it. And this is another one here. This thing, this is a Cordell Spot. That's another bait that I can't explain why I've caught as much on that as I have. And here's a rattle trap that this one's faded to all heck. Here's one that's the same color. They don't work the same though. This one's different. And one thing I have noticed about this one is, when it lands in the water and starts to fall, it has this funky fall to it. It swims fine, swims real straight right back, but it has this weird sideways fall to it, almost like it's something sick or hurt. And then when you begin to retrieve it, it rights itself. But then if, like, I do a lot of stop and go with a lipless crankbait, just like I do with a crankbait. So when I stop, this thing kind of turns on its side funny, and that could be a trigger that makes this thing better than one that's supposed to be identical to it, even though we know they're not all identical. Especially, they talked about the wood densities and wooden baits not being identical. The plastic ones aren't identical either. There's differences, and like someone else mentioned, that over time they change the manufacturing. Sometimes they change the molds. You can go down the rabbit hole on the wiggle warts. They've changed that mold over the years. The old wiggle warts are, people have much more confidence in them and say they catch a lot more fish than the new ones, and I kind of think they do, but I don't have enough confidence. I don't have enough experience with that bait to know that for sure, but I do with these. And so let me know what you think about this discussion tonight. This has been a longer discussion. I actually thought about doing this as a live thing, and maybe down the road I'll do something like that so that people can text in and we can have a conversation back and forth, and then we'll put that on video as well. But I thought that was an interesting subject, and I thought I'd give you my 2 cents on it, my experience, what I've read, what I've studied, what I've found out. Remember, this channel is all about the art and science of fishing, especially bass fishing. And so, there's an art to this. There's an art to what we do and the methods we use and the decisions we make and how we cast and all that. But there's science that comes into play, and that science sometimes could be important too, to understand that and to make us better fishermen. That's what this channel is about. We're certified Bassified. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends, let them know about the channel if you think it's good, if you think the information is enlightening and helpful. Let them know. That helps grow my channel. That helps me. And remember, as always, may God bless your fishing endeavors.